welcome to the fourth film discussion that is being organized as part of our ongoing exhibition season, Psyche. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Gayatri Manu, the Program Associate at Science Gallery, Bengaluru, and we are a dynamic new public institution in the city of Bangalore for public engagement with research. I'm very excited to introduce you all to Patrick and Dane, who will be engaging in a conversation on Patrick's film, From Over Here, which is being shown as a part of Psyche. But before I introduce the both of them to you, let me speak a bit more about the programs that we have organized as a part of the exhibition over the coming weeks. First, we have Unpacking the Creative Process, which is a workshop by experimenter Jyotsna Iyer. And this is taking place on Thursday, 5th May at 8 p.m. Then we have Thinking in a Dish, Stem Cell Research in the Human Brain, which will be a panel discussion with Raghu Padinyat, Sridhar Venkatapuram, Sujata Raman on Friday, 6th May at 4:30 p.m. With that, let me introduce you to the discussants for this evening. We have with us Patrick Burr, the director of From Over Here. He is a filmmaker and animation artist based in Cologne, Germany. He studied philosophy at the Humboldt University in Berlin and media art at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne. His short films range from comedic autofiction to absurdist surrealism and often employ playful, multi-layered storytelling. They have been shown at dozens of film festivals, including Tampere, Pictoplasma, Berlin, Oberhausen, DOK, Leipzig, Clermont-Ferrand, Encounters Bristol, and Slam Dance. And I'm very excited to introduce you to Dane Isaacs, who's going to be in conversation with Patrick about his film. He is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Psychology at Stellenbosch University. He holds a master's degree in psychology from the University of Cape Town. His doctoral work explores the discourse of masculinities among young adult men in Western Cape Town who stutter. His research interests include psychoanalytical perspectives on disability inequality and psychological experience of disability discrimination and impairment, specifically in the context of people who stutter. In addition, he is interested in post-structuralist theories of gender, the social construction of masculinity, particularly within the South African context, and the perpetration of intimate partner violence against women. We are very excited to have the BBT Welcome Trust India Alliance support this film along with all the other films that are being shown as a part of our exhibition season. And we're very excited to have Dane and Patrick in conversation this evening. I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation for any of you who have watched the film. You know how experimental and honest Patrick has been in his depiction of living with stuttering, and Dane, of course, has researched this in his own work. So I'm sure it's going to be an extremely insightful conversation. With that, I'd like to hand over to you both. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure, Dane, where should we start?
Sure, Patrick. So maybe you can just, just give just a overview of what you want to do, communicate in this film, and then I'll just speak to it.
Okay. You asked me in our conversation beforehand that you wanted to know why I made this film. And I think that's an interesting question because it raises a lot of complex issues, because it also touches on why making art in general. And I was remembered of a small anecdote from my childhood when I was 14 and still kind of outsiderish, like in my school and so on, and didn't have a lot of people in my life that shared the same interests. I was also really, I wanted to watch as much television as possible. And my parents were very strict about television. But one time, like in the middle of the night, I discovered like a short film program that showed like experimental short films. And that was like a complete explosion in that moment for me, because even though it didn't really express like explicitly certain issues, the mere fact that individuals made this kind of thing that was completely outside of the box and outside of the norms of like the aesthetics you usually saw on television, especially like in the 90s, before you had YouTube or internet or anything, any way to discover things that are outside the norm, that really opened up for me the idea that a different world or a different life is even possible. And retrospectively, I think that's so interesting that just some experimental film, even an abstract film, can give you like this idea that something else is possible. And so I think in that spirit, I also make my films. So I don't necessarily have a specific goal in mind. I just discover something like this old material I discovered in the film that creates some sort of resonance, and then I just go with it. I just take a deep dive and try to within this resonance I experience, just create something, and in the process of creation learn something new that I didn't know before and that I couldn't have learned without this process. And I think that goes full circle to this idea of stuttering and the gaps in language, that, just playing with the gaps and within this play, discover like new perspectives. Yeah, so maybe this this little anecdote as a starting point.
No, thank you so much, Patrick. And I think, as I told you before, that film, it's, it's short, but it encapsulates a lot, of what, stuttering is, that subjective experience. Like I love, that whole metaphor that you use about the pigeon, and the pigeon sitting there, and then you kind of get frustrated when the pigeon kind of shows its head. And I think, for many people, who stutter, I reflect on myself, it's like you want to put your best foot forward. But I guess when that pigeon, if I can bring that analogy in, shows its head, it's like it actually paralyzes you on so many levels. And I love the picture where you brought with this woman, and you're trying to speak, and then you use this very nice description about this performance. And because you were stuttering, she kind of left. And I think, for many people who stutter, there's always this, we always tend to beat ourselves up around not making that impression. And, so the response around that, and I think Patrick wanted me to speak around the issue of, of patience and the concept of patience, and just to bring it in there, we are meant to be very kind to ourselves, but I think that Patrick would also, echo this, that people who stutter are the greatest critiques. Like we ourselves critique us for not putting our best foot forward, and I guess I remember very strikingly with my PhD research, and there was someone who stuttered severely, and with the first interview, interestingly enough, I actually got impatient with him because I was aware, that there's a certain time this interview needs to be done, and he's stuttering on every single word. And it was quite interesting for me to see how, and Patrick speaks on this, the concept about translingualism, and I know it can be spoken in terms of language, but I'm also thinking around, various identities that we as people who stutter fulfill within this dialogue called conversation. Like we can be on one level a very fluent speaker, but we can also be the disfluent speaker. And I think on both levels, we tend to navigate like this position, and this issue around patience. So on one level, when we take the position on as a stutterer, we want people to be patient and understanding. But then, when the roles are reversed, we tend to not be patient to someone else who stutters, and so we become a bit insensitive to that, subjective, experience. And, that's why I complimented Patrick on his work, because he really kind of pulls together this nice analogy, if I can call it that, about, the subjective experiences of stuttering, and I think of stuttering now, and Patrick also asked me to speak about, and it's all just tying into this nice conversation about the evolving perception of stuttering. And I think that more and more, like the last decade or so, there's been this growing body of knowledge around, disability studies and stuttering, and as I explained to Patrick, that when we hear the term disability, there's automatically this fear or more resistance by people who stutter, and my research shows this whole conflict around, am I disabled? Am I not disabled? Where do I stand? Because on one level, I can see it as a disability, but I'm honestly not going to hone that a personality as my own. And I think that because Patrick kind of pulls together the subjectivity of stuttering so beautifully, there's this body that's growing, that's trying to tell the world out there that that we are tired of having to deal with the subjective pains and struggles, and insecurities of stuttering, and we kind of want to give it a voice. And I think the disability studies lens, it gives it such a beautiful voice, because the disability studies lens kind of takes people who stutter, metaphorically, of course, and actually says, let's stop locating the problem within you, and let's start to bring these experiences to the fore, and let us start to bring about the social, and the political aspects of stuttering, and Patrick spoke so nicely around rhythms in his literature, rhythms, and how we live in a world that has a certain rhythm, and a rhythm in terms of communication practices and how we speak in a typical conversation, and when I speak about communication practices, I think, just to be more explicit in my response, I think, and I speak about communication practices, I speak about this typical confident, fluent speech. And that's the dominant communication practices that is revered, that will give you kind of social capital, because with a fluent and confident speech, you can basically go anywhere in life. You can navigate any space with that communication practice. And, when Patrick spoke about, there's certain rhythms, and because people who stutter are just fluent, their speech moves against the rhythm of what is expected of us. We face all sorts of discrimination, all sorts of oppression, because our rhythm is out of sync with the mainstream rhythm of communication. and and that's why I in my work personally, I would love to see those rhythms, those hidden barriers and boundaries actually illuminated so that it can be addressed, on the level of policy, on the level of interventions. Because I think that stuttering in itself, and I love what Patrick, the description he gives at the start of his video, it is so amazing, because you would to agree that stuttering, when you speak about stuttering, there's this uncomfortable silence. And he starts off and he says that this is for a certain group of people, and you will find out afterwards who that people are. And I love that, because it echoes this, because Patrick kind of first had to explain the experience before he could kind of tie it to people who stutter. And I think that is the picture that exists currently in stuttering, that we have this experience and it's visible to people, but it's like the connection between stuttering and experience. There's this disjointing, and it's that silence in between, because and this silence could be translated in terms of ignorance, in terms of not just knowing how to respond to people who stutter, and I think that movies or films, short films like Patrick, would be so important to communicate the struggles, because I always find, as an academic, as a researcher, and Patrick can comment, I've shared some pieces with Patrick, and it's very dense, it's long. I don't think the average person would have time to actually read every journal article, every book chapter on the topic. And I think that the way that Patrick uses art as a very simplified way, to communicate the struggles of something, I think us moving now into this whole fourth industrial revolution. And we cannot deny that most knowledge at this point, it will be disseminated through social media, through films. I think more and more we are moving away from the typical journal articles. And I think of the normal academic journals now. There's a big emphasis on, on making knowledge accessible to civil society. So beyond these small academic circles, how do you make knowledge acceptable and accessible, to the normal person out there beyond these very sophisticated spaces? So I really think that Patrick's work, where stuttering or the discourse is starting to transition, and it has been transitioning the last 10 years, that it will be so important to have such short films and having that disabilities perspective kind of inserted in those films, and as I told Patrick, that there shouldn't be a pressure to identify yourself as disabled. I still, to be honest, find it uncomfortable to own that identity, because of various other reasons, the stigma attached to it. But what I'm saying, and as I told Patrick, that, a disability on a political and on a social level, I think it should be addressed. But we shouldn't necessarily be pressured to call ourselves disabled if we're not comfortable with that. And Patrick's words asked me also other techniques. When I reflect, and Patrick uses a nice thing in his movie about. Are you going to say something, Patrick?
Maybe I can respond to your points before we go to the techniques, because I had some thoughts I wanted to share. So thank you, Dane, for all this. And yeah, I think we can say that it's an experience of being out of sync. But what I also wanted to try to convey in my approach is that it's not necessarily this perspective of disability, because as you mentioned and know, in itself, this word has a lot of problems involved, because you kind of adhere to a narrative and say, okay, I'm not able to do what is expected, but but I would rather, or I try to see this as like an opportunity to being out of sync, as like an opportunity to create maybe new and interesting ways. And it's also really about for me about claiming your own narrative, and not kind of so there are obviously always both sides. Like this one extreme example I mentioned from time to time is that if you don't fit into, let's say, the Hitler Youth in the Third Reich, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because even if you are inside this time and this place, perhaps you don't really know what like the bigger context is, but perhaps you feel that something is going on that you on a deep level don't agree with or are not in sync with. So in retrospect, if someone would say, now I stuttered in the Hitler Youth and I couldn't integrate, it wouldn't be seen like a bad thing. So so for me, it's extremely important also for society to have people who don't fit in, because this always opens the space for reevaluating what is taken for granted. Because if you always resonate with what's going on, and you have no reason to kind of reflect on these things. And it's been always the outsiders, like throughout human history, that pushed society forward. Otherwise, we would still probably have like kings everywhere, and like this old concept of land ownership and so on. If there weren't like people who felt like a kind of dissonance in this things, and this also connecting to the performance, because so in my film I mentioned the example of memorizing texts. So in my case, Faust, and then reciting in order as a way out, and in quotation marks out. So this idea that you of performance, because oftentimes stutterers don't stutter when they sing, or when they talk in a fake radio voice or something like that, or when they whisper. And that's really interesting, because to me, I don't know, you can also talk about your interpretation if you have a different one, but for me, it's in that moment of performance, you don't have the pressure of performing yourself. And performing yourself means like you represent what place in society you take. And so when you take a step back and I'm a different person now, then you don't have this pressure of this expectation also. And maybe one other little anecdote from my childhood. It's in school. We had to do a small exercise in like French class, and so we had to perform a small play in French, and already the expectations, because I was kind of a weirdo, were that, oh, will he remember, will he able to speak the sentence, and so on. And I only had like the shortest thing. I had to say sors Jacques sors, which means leave Jacques. And when the moment came, I had the sentence in my head. It circled in my head, sors Jacques sors, but I couldn't say it. And I stood there and everybody nodded like, oh, yeah, that's what we expected. He forgot, but I didn't forget. I had it very clear, but I couldn't speak because the expectations were so extremely strong. And in that moment, I also had the feeling I am performing myself, I'm not performing. So it was really interesting to memorize this text. And because when you recite, with reciting, you really feel what language is in a way, because I'm still baffled by the fact that so when I speak really fast, like Habe nach Philosophie, Juristerei, Medizin, auch die Theologie, it goes on for 20 minutes, and I think, okay, this is all stored, you know, and I don't pull it out of my brain. I just set the intent, and then the speech comes by itself. And so you really realize that that you are not speaking like actively, but you are connecting to this flow of what thought is. And yeah, I think for me it was also within this film really important to underline the opportunities, and not say that it's only something that needs therapy in the sense of you need to revert to a healthy state. But no, it could be an impulse to grow towards more more understanding thing that in the end, through your disconnectedness from society, you might end at a place where you integrate something really valuable back into society through your perspective. And I also read your text, and maybe you could expand on this idea of the wounded healer, that is also the therapist, even though I don't like the notion of therapy, for the reason that it's the idea that you take a step back into health instead of going forward into growth. But this idea that the wounded healer can give society something that couldn't take place without this people who are out of sync. And yeah, perhaps you can speak on that.
Sure. No, thank you so much, Patrick. And you also gave me some real valid points. And I think, let me start with the disability label that you speak about, the identity. And I love what you were saying, that, you know, and that's why I emphasize, you know, that there's no pressure, you know, for people to accept, as you say, because it kind of confines and defines someone to that particular identity, you know. And obviously we cannot control how society sees disabled people, despite all the activism and the deconstructing and constructing of more affirmative identities within policy. People still have a negative connotation around stuttering. We know we're not stuttering, sorry, about disability. And I think that you know, and I totally agree with Patrick that there should be allowed that agency, you know, to allow people, you know, to create multiple identities in response to their struggle of stuttering. It might not necessarily mean disability, but I think, you know, that's why I emphasize as an agenda and as an intervention, that becomes acceptable perspective, because I feel that I might not necessarily call myself disabled, but what I'm saying is that let us start to become cognizant, you know, and I won't say become sensitive. I think become cognizant of the struggles and the barriers that society puts in place that actually makes it difficult for someone to navigate the world, you know. And it ties to the next comment that Patrick made about this pressure around performance and how he's so right. I mean, I sing. I mean, I sing for the most part of my life, and as Patrick rightfully said, that when you sing and when you recite something on your own, the chances of that you stuttering is very rare. And I picked that up. I remember vivid memory in grade 6, which in the South African system is high school, or senior school. And we had to do this interview. And on my own, so I had to interview my mother, but on camera, and someone took the camera for me, the video. And me alone, I completed that interview as fluent as possible. But the moment I had my mother in the room and that camera guy, I stuttered like it's going out of fashion. And I think it's because what Patrick says, it's expectations, and it goes back to these this communication practices. And I always say that stuttering happens, on one level, it's your experience, but it's also how you interact with the, with the listener. And because we have this mindset, the listener is waiting for this fluent, confident speaker, and now all of a sudden you stutter. And so, as Patrick would agree, I think, the fact that we want to be fluent further exacerbates our stuttering, because we want to be fluent, and so we stutter more in the goal of being fluent. And I think that is those pressures that Patrick speaks about. And the nice thing with the disability studies lens, it kind of highlights, it puts that light on all those hidden barriers, the pressures, issues of chronopolitics. When I speak about chronopolitics, I speak about issues of time. So there's a certain time you need to say certain things, and there's a certain time. When I think about certain communication practices happen within time, and I think on the telephone, there's a certain time you need to say hello. There's a certain time you need to put the phone down. So time attached, that also makes it difficult for people to stutter. And I think that is why, the disability studies lens kind of brings the importance of that in. And I agree with Patrick with the therapy thing. I'm also very cautious around this narrative of fixing me. It's like, why do I need therapy always? Why can't I just recreate my place in society? Why can't my stutter speech be accepted? Why can't it be an acceptable and valuable part of society that I live in? And, in terms of, and just to tie that comment to the issue of the wounded healer, and just to give a summary, so the article that Patrick is speaking about is where I narrate my personal experiences being a person who stutters when I wanted to become a clinical psychologist, and I was excluded out of the clinical psychology program because I was a stutterer. And I was told that my stutter, in summary, that my stutter would be harmful to patients. The patient's well-being comes first, and that's why I can't stutter in front of patients. And interestingly enough, now that I've gone through that experience, I find myself being very empathetic to other struggles. And the wounded healer, the concept of the wounded healer argues that because you've gone through struggles of your own, it makes you a better therapist. You speak from a place of experience, so you know exactly what struggles and what barriers there is that actually gets people and makes people. That's why I'm very big on I hate people feeling excluded. because I felt excluded. I was bullied. I had people going through bullying. So I would make an active attempt to make my spaces, my conversations, all my interactions very inclusive, because I know what it is to actually be excluded, in different spaces. And, so I hope I answered Patrick's question, or questions, and comments, and just to go to the techniques, and Patrick asked me, just to kind of, you can see that I don't stutter anymore visibly as I used to, and he asked me to speak around techniques. And I think for me, I love what Patrick said, that whilst we pursue techniques, I also feel that we shouldn't go with the mindset of trying to be fixed, or trying to put up a performance. I think you should still be a proud person who stutters, and my colleagues, Joshua or Patrick Campbell and Chris Constantina, and Sam Simpson, and I've written a book, Stammering Pride. And so they argue that we need to get to a point where we actually become proud of being people who stutter, and I think there's no downside of going for speech therapy. I mean, I went to speech therapy about 3 times in my journey. I mean, I didn't find speech therapy necessarily helpful, and that's why I attended a self-help group, and that helped me to manage my stutter. As you can see now, I am 98% fluent, but I'm not going to not deny the fact that I stutter, and that I still want to be sensitive to someone else who stutters, someone else who is still on that journey of getting, but even if I don't get to that journey of the level of fluency I'm at, that's also fine, because as Patrick, I love what he says, that there needs to be room in society to allow people to construct multiple identities that is suited for them, and the space that they find themselves in, and that's comfortable for them. I might have reached a high level of fluency. I define myself as someone who stutters. Someone else might say I'm not, and that's totally fine. I think where we are at, I think it's just respecting someone who stutters and doing these techniques and going. So things like speech therapy. I've had participants in my study which found speech therapy helpful, and like me, like other men, found a speech therapy totally out of touch with the lived reality of stuttering. So I think that there should be that room for therapy, but I also feel that therapy shouldn't be approached or used or actually designed to fix and to manage, because you are telling me there's something wrong with me when I was born with this. It's not something I need to apologize for. It's me. It's who I am. It's like telling someone who is gay that you need to be straight when they were born being gay, when you are born being lesbian, when you are born being bisexual. So I think the same understanding, the same approach is sort of like, don't try to fix me, don't try to make me straight, if I can speak in terms of the LGBTQI plus community, except that I've got a different sexual identity. I respect you are heterosexual, but I can be queer, I can be pan, I can be lesbian, I can be trans, I can be intersex, I can be many other things, but still exist in a world that is inclusive, accepting, and that sees me as a valuable part of ever-changing and ever-evolving society.
Maybe there I could expand on one point, which also was part of my film. So I tried in my film also to expand what stuttering means, and like the notion of stuttering, because for the most part, I wouldn't say I was like a classical stutterer who really had like, I did have mechanical issues, but I don't think they were at the center of the problem. And I try to think about stuttering as something more big that can also manifest itself in the way just people think, and how your associations wander, and maybe the rhythm of your associations that don't quite fit. And that leads to the point of, which is also in the film, there's definitely this link to this also like maybe struggles of the queer community also in relation to the norms. But I wanted to argue that in the space of the expanded stuttering, it is like a problem in itself when you when there's no label you can use. You can't. I think some people can't really say, okay, I'm gay, for example, or something like that. Some people, I think, and oftentimes it's the artistic types that are kind of they are just perceived as strange, but you can't really say why, or they themselves can't really say why. And that also creates like another interesting set of problems when you can't pinpoint your problem. And I think that's very interesting. And I think that's also one of the reasons, like there's a very big queer community within the art scene, obviously, but it's not always that easy to like have a diagnosis of what it actually is. But maybe then coming to the point where you say, okay, a diagnosis is not needed. Perhaps it's just that you give yourself over to like a certain kind of creative process, and perhaps saying yes to the gaps, and in the situations when people perceive you as weird or is kind of strange, you just or I, for myself, I don't want to speak for other people or what could work for other people, but I, for myself, like going within myself and releasing this tension, and maybe just accepting the absurdity or the this thing. And also when I talk to other stutterers, it makes it easier for me when the stutterer when they don't feel the pain in that moment, or the shame, when they let go of the shame, when they just do what they can, but without going into this place of shame. That also makes it easier for me to engage. So I try to just let it flow in a way, and kind of accept this this performance of myself in that at that moment, if that makes sense. But yeah, there can't always be like this one coming out moment attached to your situation. It's oftentimes way more complex than that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I fully agree with you, Patrick. And I think in one of my papers, when I looked at men's masculinities experiences, and I published this paper in the Psychology Journal of Men and Masculinities. And as you said, that there was actually someone that was part of the LGBTQI plus community. I was a gay guy who stuttered, and he said how the position or the positions that he occupied. So as a gay guy and as a person who stutters, and he had to how those marginalized positions he navigated in his own identity caused him to deconstruct and reconstruct an identity that works for him. I think we need to get to the point where we move away from this one way of existing in the world and start to realize there are multiple ways of existing in this thing called life, and that experiences and bad experiences and our different positions in life, our different struggles can facilitate the construction of identities that are really accepting, and we're seeing it more and more with the whole pronouns thing, and the queer and the LGBTQI plus community, where more space has been made for pronouns. So we know that the simple binary of he and she, that's been contested on so many levels, and we seeing pronouns, people now defining themselves as they, he. People are starting to own their identities, and I think a similar thing should happen in the context of people who stutter. That there should be now that facilitation, of constructing identities that will really carry your passion, your person, and also who you want to be in life. Thank you. And I end there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick and Dane, for that absolutely fascinating discussion, for not only sharing these very personal anecdotes with us, but also insights from your research. And of course, Patrick, the observations you gave us into your own practice as a filmmaker has been fascinating to listen to. I'd like to remind the audience to post their questions in the Q&A box. But while we wait for them to do that, perhaps Patrick and Dane, I could ask you a few questions myself. Patrick, I specifically wanted to discuss with you this idea of the in-group, out-group dynamic that you've explored in the film. It sort of begins with the film is only made for certain people, and towards it's dedicated to certain people, and towards the end of the film also you ask those who don't belong to the group to stop watching the film. So can you speak to us a little bit about who this is addressed to, and what your intentions behind making the statement very clear throughout the film was?
I think first and foremost, I found it kind of comedic to make explicit what is more or less implicit in most films. Because it's not my first film. I've been with quite a few films at film festivals and engaged with like many audiences, and it's often the case that when people don't like a film, they're really they almost get angry, because I think films can also be seen as some kind of attack, perhaps on your identity or whatever, or your in-group, and yeah, in that sense, for me, I was surprised how comedic it is just to say that, and it was also important for me because in the end I just don't only say, okay, look away now, you people who don't understand. I also say I also appreciate you. So it was this kind of suggestion that yeah, but I still received like and there's also like reviews on the internet where people say, yeah, he told us it's not for me, but I still don't like it. It's funny also because it still doesn't work, because even when you say it, people are still, I mean, offended is too strong of a word, but still kind of take a distance. And maybe one more thing, I also in general find it fascinating that within films, outsider figures are often beloved, like when you see an outsider in a film, especially like in a big Hollywood film or something, many people can identify and say, I identify with that figure. But when they encounter a real outsider in reality, they don't have the same reaction. So it's a really funny thing how you identify with like on-screen things in art and how you engage with reality. It's very, very different. And through making this explicit, I wanted to play with like the expectations you have for films, and also in contrast to reality.
Yeah, I think for those of you who haven't watched the film yet, the film is extremely experimental and it's challenging, but it's also very engaging and it has a very playful tone to it. So, like Patrick just pointed out, there are these little moments interspersed throughout the film. So, I would request you all to go and check out the film. Which will be online on our exhibition until 9th April. Patrick, I also wonder, you'd spoken about the fact that this isn't the first film you made. You've made other films, but can you speak to us a little bit about the animation format deployed in this film in particular? Most of, we have 2D sort of sketches and scribbles, which then turn into, sort of 3D renders, and you explore the space through that. So I was wondering if there's there's a kind of disorientation also that the viewer feels as you're taken through the narrative. I was wondering if there's any sort of connection between both the medium used and the title of the film as well, From Over Here, which talks specifically about a particular kind of place. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, Patrick.
Yes, so maybe oftentimes I try to employ a kind of like do-it-yourself aesthetic, which is I think the film wouldn't work if you had like conventionally beautiful images, like a Pixar animation or something like that, because you also lose kind of this personal touch. And I think also within drawing, it's really interesting to see people who are not classically trained to draw, because in the mistakes you make or they make, you kind of feel a more direct idiosyncrasy of that person, as opposed to something where you trained yourself to adhere to the norms of how drawings should look like, or which most of the time means as close to Disney and Pixar as possible, which I find within animation really boring. So so this kind of more rough, immediate style, especially for this film, seemed very appropriate, and also like mixing it with my actual handwriting, because there's a lot of letters involved that I scanned from paper and put into the film. And yeah, so I don't know if this answers the question, but yeah, that's kind of also the idea of this do-it-yourself aesthetic. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it does answer the question in a way, Patrick, but I also had a follow-up question, which was about the title of the film. I wonder if you have anything to share with us regarding that.
Well, I think it's relatively simple, because like I said in the film, it's I wanted to define this perhaps, instead of saying, okay, I am disabled, saying that I am dislocated, in a way to kind of reformulate this idea as like a spatial thing. And From Over Here, to me, sounds very inviting. It's like, hey, from over here, like I'm on this island, hello, and like a boat that's passing by or something like that. So in that sense, it kind of points to this idea that stuttering is not a disease, it is a location. And also in that way, if you want to build bridges to like the other islands or whatever, or to the mainland, it's a creative act, and it's not, and it's really. I'm really, like I already said, strongly opposed to this classical idea of therapy, which for me always means, okay, you were basically born healthy, and then something went wrong, and then you are not healthy. Now we have to revert back to to the state of health. It's like, no, it's in a way born this way, and then okay, I'm out of sync, so I have to kind of build my own structures so it's a more like a positive twist. And for me, like in my special case, I see it like as a success story. It's not like I don't see it as failure. And it's also the notion, like relating to the drawings that maybe don't adhere to the standards. It's like a failure also as a practice. Like within your failure, it's a learning experience, and also it's gives you new perspectives.
Yeah, I also think that it kind of reflects this your thwarting of the standards of perfection, which is something that the film anyway discusses in the kind of ideas that are brought forth, but through the medium, especially through the kind of roughness that the drawings carry, that idea gets translated very easily for a viewer. Unfortunately, we seem to be running out of time, so we are going to be wrapping up the session for this evening. Thank you so much, Dane and Patrick, for coming on board and engaging in this conversation and sharing your experiences and expertise with us. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. And I think for an exhibition season that explores the human mind, for us to also discuss the ways in which we connect with each other through language, or the ways in which we disconnect with each other through problems of language, has been very interesting to observe through your work, Patrick, and of course through your research, Dane. So thank you both for spending time with us here this evening. And thank you all who have attended the discussion. As I mentioned earlier, in the event, we have the film online up until the 9th of April as a part of our ongoing exhibition season. So please do check that out. And if you know anyone who wanted to attend this discussion but couldn't make it, the recordings of all our events are uploaded to our YouTube channel. So please do go subscribe to our YouTube channel and share the recording of this link along with our other events with people who you think might find this discussion interesting. And I would encourage you all to also fill in the feedback form, which has been dropped in the chat, because it'll help us know what you enjoyed about this program and what we could do better going forward. With that, I'd like to bring the session to a close. Thank you once again, Dane and Patrick, for your time and for your engagement. We really appreciate it. Do take care, everyone. Stay safe and have a good Sunday. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.